Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing to allow us to bring you behind the headlines here in Israel, what is happening in the war. It's a great honor to be joined today by Ambassador Eli Yerushalmu, who is a retired Israeli diplomat who served as the ambassador to Ecuador, Armenia, and Moldova at the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Eli, thank you so much for joining today.
It's an honor being with you.
I believe it was back in October, early November, you were on the briefing. It's a lot of things that happened in this war since. So maybe we can start off. You can give us a general update about what is happening in the war from your perspective.
Okay. First of all, hi, everybody. The main things which today, the main issues which are happening in Israel is one, will there be an attack on Rafah or not in the very near future? And the whole Gaza situation. Of course, we have to think, first of all, about the hostages, about destroying Hamas, and how do we return back our population that left the areas of the frontier with Gaza. The second issue is, of course, Lebanon. Lebanon, there are two possibilities. One is to try to solve the situation through war, and the second is, of course, through diplomacy. It doesn't look like Hezbollah is going anywhere from the frontier towards the north. Therefore, most Israelis think that there will probably be a military operation. And here also we need to think about our population. Tens of thousands of Israelis left their home and are actually now refugees inside Israel. And this situation must end. The hostage issue is, of course, something very, very much high in our concern. Will there be a deal? There are a lot of talks about a total deal, a limited deal. What will be the price? Of course, this causes all kinds of internal friction in Israel about the price for the deal. Do we have to give the Hamas everything they want, or of course settle for less? All this is being discussed in Israel, and I'm sure you are seeing this in the media. And of course, we have to understand that there's all the time that there's the Iranian threat on Israel. There's a nuclear threat, the possibility of Iran becoming nuclear, and everything that comes together with it. When we look at the international arena, Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday said in the government to the world, did you already forget the 7th of October? It seems that Israel is now the aggressor. We forgot, how this, the world forgot how this story started. And of course, this is an issue of standards of morale that, of course, we cannot tolerate. And we see this, of course, coming, first of all, from the United States. On one hand, the United States is supporting Israel, has supported Israel since the 7th of October. But since then, the policy changed a lot. Of course, the United States supplies Israel with armaments and votes with us and vetoes resolutions against Israel in the United Nations. On the other hand, we see a whole American program to stop our attack on Rafah. If there will not be an attack on Rafah, this basically means that Israel lost this war. And of course, the humanitarian issue of supplying Gaza with humanitarian aid, this is very, very problematic. If we look back into World War II, nobody thought about giving humanitarian aid to Nazi Germany or something, or to the Japanese. And here, we all know that this humanitarian aid is not only totally humanitarian, but a lot of arms come with it and so on. And it's very hard to check what exactly comes into the area. There's a lot of political pressure on Israel, of course. You've been hearing things like Senator Schumer, who basically intervened in our election process, calling for new elections and so on. This is something unheard of. And of course, this must stop. Israel is a democracy, and imagine, Israel intervening in the elections in the United States and so on. This is something not done. But I assume this will continue until the elections in the United States. We all know that President Biden is under pressure from the states that are shaky in his perspective, like Minnesota and Michigan and so on. And this is, of course, and the Islamic vote there. This is, of course, very problematic. And of course, this comes out in terms of American policy towards Israel. We see in general a weakness of the West in this conflict. We see this with the Houthis, let's say, in Yemen, where the Americans, the British, and the Allies are not exactly acting forcibly in order to ensure the safety of vessels and so on in the Red Sea area. The Houthis are firing rockets almost at random. By the way, they have a very strong army. We're talking about an army of 500,000 soldiers. So the Houthis are very strong, and you need here the superpowers to act forcibly, and unfortunately, they're not doing so. We see the same kind of action between Russia and Ukraine. Russia is now actually attacking much more. In a way, it's moving the Ukrainians backward, and the West is not doing too much about this. We see Chinese aggression in Asia towards its neighbors, and again, the United States and Western powers are not doing too much about it. So all this is very problematic. It seems that the Axis states, the countries like Russia and China and Iran, it seems that they are on the move while the West is very, very, very weak. If we take region by region, we see in the Middle East, we see two groups in this region, the ones who are pro the Abraham Accords and those who are against, like Iran. We see the Turks also standing against and so on. And of course, we have the Palestinian issue. And suddenly we hear from the United States and other Western countries their aim and goal to go for a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, and so on. In Israel, nobody in his right mind wants to see a Palestinian state on our doorstep, especially after what happened on the 7th of October. The situation in Europe also doesn't look good. Yesterday, we had the visit of the German chancellor here in Israel. For the first time, the Germans are not totally pro-Israel. We hear from them that the humanitarian issue is much more critical for them, and so on. The same we hear from France and Britain, and now from Canada, that the Canadian Parliament might be voting for a pro-Palestinian state and against the armament of Israel. And we see that this is very much similar to what we hear from the United States. By the way, in France, let's say the polls are showing that the majority of the population are pro-Israel because they are afraid that the Islamists in France will do to the regular Frenchmen what was done to Israel on the 7th of October. So we see a lot of weakness of these countries towards their own Islamic population and towards the Arab world. In Asia, as I just mentioned, it's China against a lot of its neighbors. China is, of course, now very anti-Israel in terms of its position and where it's standing. Australia is much more for Israel, although it's not as it used to be because it's a Labour government and they are a little bit leaning towards the left. And actually, one of the good things happening in Asia is India and India's stand. India is very pro-Israel. The Indian Navy is very active in the Indian Ocean and near the Red Sea. So India is actually a good sign in terms of Israel and the West. Africa, most of the African countries are either neutral or standing against Israel, especially South Africa, which took a very, very strong anti-Israeli stand. And we saw this, of course, during the discussion in the Hague when they were actually the country representing Hamas, if you wish. And then we move a little bit to South America. There we also have two parts. One is very anti-Israel, led by Brazil, Lula, who compared Israel to Nazis. He really went out of his way. Even most Brazilians were against him. Countries like Chile, which became a very pro-Palestinian state. And on the other hand, we have Argentina with a very pro-Israeli president who is also thinking of becoming Jewish, and that's an interesting story within itself of converting. And we have Ecuador, which is also much more to the right and is pro-Israel. The Ecuadorian vice president just visited Israel. So of course, diplomatically, as we see it, Israel needs now to maneuver in a very anti-Israeli sense, meaning most of the world today is moving against Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-humanitarian aid, and so on. And no doubt that diplomatically we have a very, very difficult war on our, against all these powers. I got to tell you from my personal view, we've gone through this thing before in other wars and so on. I remember worse situations than there are today. But it's a very, very tough war that's going on. And this is besides the actual war that's going on the ground in Gaza and in Lebanon, and no one knows exactly where this is going to lead to. Of course, a lot of this is a lot of damage control, if you want to call it this way, with the United States, because of the issues facing the current democratic government as we go towards elections in America. And of course, here is where you come in, and we will, of course, need a lot of your support as you talk to people and so on, and put your influence in what's happening in the United States of America. So thank you very much, and I'm open to your questions.
Thank you so much for that review, country by country, and where they stand vis-a-vis Israel. So I'll start off with a hard question, which is, have there been any diplomatic successes to date in this war that we can point at and say, wow, that actually worked, and then try to replicate that as a strategy with countries across the globe?
Well, the truth of the matter is not. It's and here I'm a bit pessimistic, meaning as I look at it, we're fighting an uphill war, almost a diplomatic uphill war, almost all over the world. It's very hard to see successes. I mentioned some of them, countries like India, and in South America, a country like Argentina, and so on. But even by mentioning those countries, we see that in general, we have a tough problem. We have, to our advantage, the populations of the countries that we're talking about. Let's say in the United States today, if we look at public opinion, we see that the vast majority of people are pro-Israel. This, of course, you cannot see in the universities and in the Democratic Party, but in general in the United States, it's still very, very pro-Israel. And the same in Europe, even countries like Germany and so on. And in France, a lot of them simply fear Islam. You have a country like Ireland, let's say, for instance. Ireland is a country which for years has been standing anti-Israel, almost anti-Semitic. But what we see now in Ireland is anti-Islamic demonstrations, because they simply see that that the Muslims are starting to control the streets of Dublin. And the same in Sweden. Sweden also has a very anti-Israeli stand. But when you start looking at Stockholm, and especially at a city like Malmo, when you see almost a majority of Muslims and they control the streets, the people understand that Israel is fighting actually their fight. So today Israel is building a lot on this public opinion in the Western world. And of course, we have the successes with a few countries that totally support us, but we need to do a lot in order to start shifting the West more towards Israel, and also to defend itself, because actually Israel is fighting a war in favor of Western civilization, if you wish. If Israel, God forbid, loses this war, this is bad news for the whole Western world.
Many of our viewers are writing in now and often comment that they feel Israel is not well represented in the international media. They turn on their TV sets in the US and they get bombarded with images that are not pro-Israel. And we always look at this from a media perspective. Why doesn't Israel have better media people out there representing? But if we could look at it from a Ministry of Foreign Affairs perspective for a question, because that is your expertise, what are Israeli ambassadors across the world doing right now, so to speak, during this war? What is their mission in these foreign countries?
First of all, I don't envy my diplomatic colleagues. Sometimes I feel, that I should put on my military uniform and go back, to fighting a war. It's very difficult, by the way, after you served, 30 years in the Israeli army, not to be amongst the fighting powers. And I got to tell you that during the first months of the war, in the town that I live in, which is not too far away from the Gaza Strip, I was on, every 2 days I was on duty on guard, even though I'm already not a young person, in the gates of the town and so on, armed and ready for duty. So even that is difficult. In my job as a diplomat, of course, I don't envy my colleagues because it's a very, very difficult war that of course I fought in a few times in diplomacy. People are working 24/7, getting into the media and so on. But now we have a problem that our story is not told. This is already, almost an ancient thing, that every time that Israel is being beaten, let's say if we're talking after the Holocaust, or if we're talking before the Six-Day War, when everybody thought that we're going to be, slaughtered by the Arab countries, and even after the 7th of October, the world was in our favor because Jews were dying and being slaughtered. The moment the Israel attacks, the moment the casualties are on the other side, and the moment you turn to self-defense, that's where you start losing it. Because I think in the psyche of the world, Jews are probably supposed to die and not to defend themselves. And the moment they defend themselves successfully, it causes this anti-Israel media. And I think this current war actually woke up a lot of things that we thought that they're somewhere in the closets or died a long time ago. It's basic anti-Semitism. We haven't seen this kind of thing since World War II, since the Holocaust. So we're fighting here a gigantic uphill battle. It's not only us and Israel and Hasbara and the foreign ministry. It's each and every one of us, because there are not too many of us, around the world, and each and every one of us has to stand, talk to his friends who are, Gentiles and so on, and represent the state of Israel, because this is going to be a tough battle for not only for the survival of Israel, but for survival of Judaism worldwide.
Right. I think it's important to also note that very often the pro-Israel community abroad kind of points a finger at Israel and says, you're not doing media relations, you don't have the right people in place. And what they may not realize is Israel does work hard at media relations, but it's a brutal battle. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism out there. And just because we're not winning the battle doesn't mean Israel is not in the fight. I want to look at a specific issue that is really in the news now about the port that the U.S. is planning on constructing in Gaza. And it seems like there are many countries kind of vying for access or to become the purveyors of the aid, whether it's Qatar, whether it's Saudi Arabia, and how Egypt fits in. Are you able to analyze that a bit for us?
First of all, I think the whole issue of the port is very problematic. Yesterday I saw a show about the United States building the ports in Europe after D-Day, and how it worked, because they needed supply to the American forces, the Allied forces that were getting into Europe, and they had to build big ports, and it basically didn't work so good. And the ports kind of floated and broke and things like that. The Gaza coast is not exactly built for a port. So first of all, I have to see this to believe it, that they are actually going to build a port and how they're going to handle it and so on. The moment it comes into being, we'll have to see exactly how it works, because without Israel, it won't work. So here, I think we'll actually have a lot of leverage to negotiate exactly what is going to happen in this port, what is it going to look like, and so on. But let's see how it goes. This is going to be an interesting experiment, and I think eventually it will work for our favor, even though it's of course a bit risky. You can also say it might lead to a Palestinian state or entity with a port that is not going to be controlled by Israel. But I really don't see this happening. Don't forget that during the days of the Intifada, the Palestinians built an international airport in Gaza, which you can sometimes still see parts of it, in the sand. I have a feeling that the port is going to end pretty much the same way.
And then looking more broadly at the Gulf state countries, what are your thoughts in terms of the UAE and Saudi Arabia being involved in the next step in Gaza? Is that something Israel needs to facilitate? Is there one country that Israel should promote more than another?
Well, all of the countries that you mentioned, if we're talking about Saudi Arabia and all the Gulf states, except for Qatar, of course, which I exclude because Qatar is an enemy. Qatar is an enemy of Israel. Qatar is a provider to the Hamas. And you can just, watch Al Jazeera and understand exactly what Qatar stands for. The rest of the countries would like to see the Abraham Accords continuing and to go back to the peace process. But of course, they have a problem. They have a problem, first of all, with the way the Arab world is perceiving the current situation in Gaza. They kind of, are kind of waiting for things to quiet down. So things, in a way, are on hold. And of course, they're also looking for American leadership, which they don't see right now. Because in one hand, the Americans are telling them, you know what? Maybe now we'll go for the continuation of the Abraham Accords. Maybe we'll form a Palestinian state within the Abraham Accords and all that. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia and others will say, yeah, of course, we're for a Palestinian state. And the moment you'll talk to these people under the table, you'll find out that the Palestinian state, that's the last thing that they need. So of course, there's a lot of, absurds in this situation, but I assume that they will be waiting this thing out to see in the next few months what exactly is going to happen. And I think they're already waiting to see what will happen in the elections in the United States. I think they're looking at this period as a kind of interim period before they decide how to move forward.
Thank you. Just a reminder to all of our viewers, you can sign up for our newsletter to get the replay of these briefings, and you can sign up to our WhatsApp community to get highlights and clips of these briefings. All of those links are in the chat. Eli, I want to ask you a question kind of broader. You mentioned Russia, China, and Iran are kind of coalescing together. Does the West not understand or realize that that is happening right now, and they just view this as an isolated conflict in the Middle East? Or does the West have other interests? The U.S. is worried about elections, and it's just not a priority right now.
Well, that's a very difficult question, and I'll treat it as in a way as an historian. When you look, history is my hobby, by the way. So when I look at the world today, and I look at the world pre-World War II as a comparison, we could almost see the same thing. You ask, why did the West behave the way it behaved? The West, because it's democratic, because it has a lot of issues, because it's more worried about economy and so on, they don't see the other side who actually wants to conquer you, if you wish, they don't see it that way. I mean, the Americans saw the Japanese. I mean, they understood what the Japanese were doing, but only when the Japanese, arrived in Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941, then they understood, suddenly that this is a threat also to the United States itself. Pretty much the same thing is happening now. Um, Everybody who has a kind of historic mind, political mind, understands very well what's happening in the world today. You see Putin winning yesterday with an 88% vote in his favor after he killed his opponent, after he murdered his opponent. All these are absurds, and the attacks on Ukraine is being shelled, Odessa and so on, almost on a daily basis. We almost don't hear about it because we're more interested in what's happening in Israel. But in Ukraine, things are getting worse and worse, and the West is looking at it and basically is doing nothing. So my assumption is that the West, because of elections, because of economy, because of this, always moves very, very slow, and only after it receives the blow, only then it enters the war. And it looks to me like this is what's going to happen to us now also.
Ambassador Eli Yerushalmu, thank you so much for joining this briefing and sharing all of this with our viewers. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in. We will be back with you tomorrow. We're going to go more in detail on the U.S.-Israel relationship and how potentially it's been deteriorating over the past few weeks. And everyone should mark their calendar on Wednesday. We're going to have a very special briefing direct from the Gaza border. So please make sure to tune in then. Both of them, of course, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.